Dev1ce interested in returning to Astralis. Here's my report. Collab. So according to our sources, Dev1ce would like to leave NIP and return to Astralis would be his favorite choice. Basically just listing his accomplishments here. He's cracked. His departure from Astralis to NIP last April will remain the surprise transfer of the year. True. Signing NIP was motivated by the fact that the Dane has been living in Stockholm for 4 years at the time of the transfer, speaks Swedish, and in his complicated COVID period, it made more sense for him to stay in the adopted country and aim for victory at the major, which was organized in Stockholm. The fact that the historical roster was at the end of its run certainly started to play a decision. Also, I don't know if they'll mention it in here. Oh yeah, he does. Okay, yeah. Basically, also a big part of why he wanted to live or not live. He already lived there. Join NIP was his girlfriend was in Sweden, which makes sense, but they're no longer together, so that probably is playing a part, you know. Twitch chat will have you believe that people move for one sole reason, but you know, I'm sure it's a very important factor, but not the only factor. Let's see. Yeah, basically just talking about how NIP is completely underperformed, and they're right. Like NIP, you know, made this big splash. They signed Dev1ce, and at the end of it was something I complained about the entire year after they signed Dev1ce, right? No way you sign arguably your biggest sign ever, the biggest transfer of the year, one of the best operators in the world, the most accomplished operator in the world, and you're rotating academy players on the roster, but we'll get into that. Yeah, talking about how they lost to Liquid, a quote-unquote dead team at Blast Premier Fall Final. LOL and ACS killed the Swedish team. LeBron like journey. I mean, I guess we could call it that. That's fine. I'll allow it. Just a reminder, you know, the Dane would have now returned to live in Denmark and Copenhagen, which would facilitate a connection between the two parties, but his transfer is extremely complicated as he was transferred for a sum between $700,000 and $1 million according to various sources. The Danish org would have to find the funds to acquire a player that NIP would not let go for nothing. He would also fit perfectly into the Astralis system because Lucky isn't just struggling, he's literally not opping. So yeah, he'd be a great fit. They don't have an opera. All right, so that's kind of the report, right? So let's dive into this. So first off, like, let's just talk about why Dev1ce wants to leave. Like I said, a lot of people will go with the, you know, this route because, you know, reality TV, you know, you got to go keeping up with the Kardashian style and be like, oh my God, they broke up, so he's leaving. He was already living in Sweden beforehand, which I found out after the fact. He was already living there, right, for 4 years. So I think it was just like a very comfortable move for him that made sense. And remember, during the COVID times, as I explained when this transfer happened, right, like he had to quarantine both ways at the start for a little while. And so I think it was just like starting to piss him off. So that's kind of why it all happened, is just it just made logistical sense, right? Which I don't totally hate. And I think there's some bad blood with the Astralis org, as we saw the org not be able to keep Zonic, Magus, and Dupree, and then simultaneously the org in like Danish media was saying that their underperformance at the major is why the Astralis org got rid of them. But anyway, so I think there's some bad blood with the org that kind of like, you know, the players weren't necessarily lining up to stay, and his personal situation obviously changes. He's no longer in that relationship. And then, but I think the biggest thing, I think the biggest thing is how NIP managed the roster after the Dev1ce joined. And that I've been saying it the entire time, okay? Like Dev1ce, sure, he signed a 3-year deal, okay? And that as an org is saying like, okay, you're committed to the long haul, but that's really not what it's saying, okay? So I need to put this in perspective for you guys, all right? You're like, maybe if you hear 3 years, you think that's not a lot. Maybe you think that's a long time for esports, maybe whatever, it doesn't matter. That's like the standard, okay? With like the big names of Counter-Strike right now, when these guys sign contracts, 3 years is kind of like it's just the norm. Nobody's really signing contracts for like 6 months. Nobody's signing contracts for a year. NIP probably wouldn't even buy him out if he wasn't willing to sign a 3-year contract. So this is like very like, as the NIP roster or management, sure, you think you have 3 years with Dev1ce, but like that also doesn't mean you should be waiting like a year and a half to start building around him, right? That's not how this works. And this whole year, NIP after signing Dev1ce was just extremely underwhelming, right? You're Dev1ce. You are the most accomplished operator in Counter-Strike history. There is no argument there. Simple might be the best, but the most accomplished operator in the entire game is Dev1ce. All right. You do not rotate. What we had 4 different academy players, if I'm not mistaken, rotate through the NIP roster. You spent $700,000 to $1 million to pay somebody and buy them out 6 months ahead of their end of their contract, and you're rotating academy players all like on the roster throughout the entire year. That is ridiculous. Like, no wonder he wants to leave, right? Like, this isn't one of those scenarios where he just broke up with his girlfriend or something and wants to go back. He's probably frustrated as fuck. Like, this isn't, even before Astralis became Astralis, TSM, right, the team that he was with, like, it was pretty much the same roster. Like, those guys were still way more like, they were in every quarterfinal, they were in every semis, they were in finals, and they, similar to Liquid back then, had like the reputation to be choke artists, but they were still like, they were going all like the distance, right? This is like the worst for, like, this is the worst that Dev1ce has ever had it inside of a team, right? And this to me, like, from outside looking in, is the real driving factor. Is like, you basically have a guy that is the most accomplished operator. He knows how to win. He's won his whole career. There's been times where he hasn't been able to get across the finish line, but he's always right there in the conversation. And right now, dude, Dev1ce really isn't a part of the conversation, right? NIP was the second best team going into the major according to rankings, right? But how many of you actually had NIP winning that, or even in the finals? That should tell you all you need to know about the roster. They came in as the second best team in the world, and people were putting NIP in the finals because they were like, oh, dude, it'd be sick if NIP got to the finals in the Swedish crowd. Nobody was like, damn, dude, I think NIP's really just gonna frag out and potentially win this thing. It was like, they barely got into the playoffs. I cannot, you know, for all of you that watch me co-stream the major, me screaming my lungs off, Hampus, as Hampus dragged his 4 dead corpse of teammates across the finish line to get into the playoffs. Like, they were lucky to be in the playoffs to begin with. Like, this roster from the start has been underwhelming. They do not put the pieces around him. Dev1ce himself has been underperforming, but you cannot look at this roster as a whole and ever be like, man, that NIP roster really is going to be number 1 now. You know? Like, and that's disappointing to say out loud. And there was a moment where it all looked like it was going to turn the corner too. And it was right before the major. You had Rez finally, like, Rez, when Dev1ce joined and up until the major, was the consistent star player alongside Dev1ce that they needed. And NIP was getting there, but they weren't completed because management was sitting there playing footsie and musical chairs with different academy players rotating in as the 5th. So the things that NIP needed to have happen for them to be successful started to have happen, which was Rez was activating and was starting to actually perform on a consistent level alongside Dev1ce. Dev1ce was starting to get comfortable in the team, and Hampus was still doing his thing. Plopsky still hit or miss, but the roles that he plays are kind of shitty. So like, I don't really like judge him one way or another. But yeah, you just had this constant 5th element that wasn't steady, never was contributing on the same level, was always changing, and completely hindered any sort of real growth the roster could have. Like, it was it's just got to be beyond fucking frustrating that you're right there. Then the major hit, and then when the major hit, I hate putting them on blast like this, but Rez completely disappeared. You know, their fifth was just mediocre at best, and Hampus was the only reason that team was in playoffs, and they have not looked good after that, and they've just been kind of hobbling along, getting mediocre results for a team that spent $700,000 to $1 million for the most accomplished opera in the world. This is that, to me, is why Dev1ce wants to leave. And if you're NIP management, man, you better wake the fuck up. Like, y'all, and I feel, you know, Esatag unfortunately has now been, this is the third roster Esatag has basically joined. Where as soon as he joined, it implodes. And I think Esatag has nothing actually to do with this, but holy shit, man, somebody needs to help that man pick better teams. Because to me, right, like these kinds of things, this kind of feeling doesn't happen like this is built up, you know what I'm saying? Like after everything I've just explained to you, Dev1ce wasn't like, oh my god, Esatag, I'm fucking going back to Denmark, dude. No, like this man already had this feeling, already had the decision. Esatag joined, and it wasn't really enough to sway him one way or the other. He kind of just already made up his mind, right? That's how I view this. And to be fair, I also, you know, Esatag has bounced around so many teams. Not even blaming the poor guy. Like, I honestly just feel bad for him at this point. Like, but it's just hard to be like, Esatag's the guy that's gonna fix it, right? It doesn't give. It's, I think, a way to sum it up, at least for me, and maybe how a lot of other people feel, is like, okay, Esatag isn't bad, but you're just really not sure he's the solution either, right? I think having Esatag and building up with Esatag is better than rotating in your academy players that you were doing. But like, is that really, you know, enough? I don't know. I'm not really sure. Esatag too unreliable. You can't have an opinion on if a player is reliable or unreliable or not when that fucking player literally has not played on a team for like more than fucking 4 months. Like, what? I don't know. Like, I can't have a positive or negative opinion of the guy because he's just boom, 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 boom. You know, it's tough, man. It's really hard to evaluate. I don't really want to. Not really trying to. I think he's kind of like, to Dev1ce's situation, not the NIP situation, to Dev1ce's specific situation, I think it has very little to do with it. You know, NIP as a whole, that's kind of like a different discussion, but I think that pretty much wraps it up for me on kind of how I'm feeling with Dev1ce. So to kind of collect my total thoughts is, you know, I think over time, Dev1ce, while he signed a 3-year contract, was extremely disappointed in the mediocre results. It's probably the worst results he's ever had as a player in like the last, like, since I full-time streamed, I've never seen Dev1ce like be on a team that's performed this poorly. I've also the constant rotating of fifths, it just doesn't seem like they ever had a plan. They jumped on the Dev1ce thing, and I think that was good. I just think that they did like the typical we scored a big win and then they kind of coast, right? And I think that I see that not just in like org management, but you see that a lot in life where like people score like one big win or like do one big thing and then they're just like content, right? Or they just, yeah, they don't push the situation. They don't have the drive afterwards to follow through with it. And in a competitive atmosphere, that's terrible. They just seemed far too complacent with Dev1ce being their big sign of the year and just relying on the fact that you have them in a 3-year contract to basically say, well, we'll figure it out eventually. And that just shouldn't be how you go about it. That just shouldn't be it. And unfortunately for Dev1ce, you're a big boy. You made a big boy decision. At the end of the day, NIP doesn't have to let you go at all, you know? And that sucks for him, but like that's totally fair of NIP at the same time, right? But from Dev1ce's perspective, he desperately, I think, wants to get out, because it just there doesn't really seem to be a plan for the NIP roster going forward on how they're going to get better. I don't think Tag is really the solution. The management as a whole doesn't seem to do a good job of identifying what talent will be good to fit the roster. I also think like the development of players has been okay, but the lack of consistency in Plopsky and Rez as of late is really scary for the long term of NIP. Like, Rez needs to be the guy. Rez needs to be the electronic of Dev1ce, and he was that up until the major, and he hasn't been that again, and that needs to change like immediately. Plopsky is honestly pretty steady on that roster, but there's definitely games where he just goes completely quiet, and Hampus might actually be the best rifler on the team. Fuck. Like, it's just the roster is not in a good place. Not in a good place. So I don't know what NIP is doing to fix these problems. Yeah, it's a mess, and I think for Dev1ce, he's like, I'm tired of being on the clown car, you know what I mean?